So, that's a good show. See you next week.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. All right. You ready?
Prepare to rant. Hi, Captain.
Here we go. Today is August 10th. That would be Monday, August 10th, 2015, and this is episode 127 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Jerry, how are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good. I'm sorry we could not record yesterday. I was at an event with my lovely fiancée, and I actually probably would have rather recorded a podcast. But it seemed like a good idea when we signed up for it.
Well, we all have our duties.
It's true.
So, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast, by the way, are ours and do not represent those of our employer, in case there's any confusion about that point.
And based on our pre-show discussion, I think this disclaimer is highly relevant.
Probably so. Probably so. So, just before we get into the mix here, a couple of points. The first thing is the High Tech Crime Investigation Association conference is coming up right on our doorstep. It is August 30th through September 2nd in beautiful Orlando, Florida. HTCIAconference.org. I bet they're probably running low on tickets or something. Let's see. Next thing is DerbyCon. That's I think September 27th, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right. Sure, we'll go with that.
Yeah, I will be flying in from beautiful and sunny New York.
Well, you're going to the HTCIA. You're going to both of them, right?
I'm going to both. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I will be at Derby, but I will not be in Orlando. Sorry.
That's all right. We'll have fun without you.
I've got to go to Michigan and be in a family portrait.
I don't know. That must be some kind of portrait, man.
It's not my idea.
Anyway, it seems like they should be able to do that over Skype or something, or with Bitcoin, or like the blockchain family pictures over blockchain. Why is somebody not coming up with this stuff?
I think I could just send a cardboard cutout.
Yeah.
Personally,
you could make it look a little better. Oh, well, not that you look bad, right?
Everybody looks better with a little Photoshop, Jerry.
True.
Especially your mom.
Oh my God. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our stories.
And wait, we weren't done. Any other events coming up that we will be at?
Not that I know of. You?
I guess not.
No.
I thought there was something else. Yeah.
Nope. I'm sure there will be soon.
So DerbyCon, you got to come find us though, because it'll be fun.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's going to be great. Oh, and speaking of DerbyCon, by the way, I started apparently I've fallen into this role accidentally of matchmaker between people who need to sell their tickets and people who need to buy their tickets. So if you have a ticket that you are not going to use, let me know. Hit me up on Twitter at maliciousLink. Let me know. I've got a bunch of people who want a ticket. I'll help you sell it.
Is this a scam?
It is not a scam. It's a public service.
Okay.
I'm trying to help the community here. All right, so oh boy, the first story we have. Yeah. Can security awareness prevent spear phishing? Is the title, and this one comes from the InfoSec Institute. So Yeah. So it's a fairly lengthy article, and there's some things in here that I have a big problem with. So
Oh, do tell.
yes. So let's jump into it. So they first start off talking about how firewalls and malware scans are needed, are important components, and that even sysadmins need to go even further and implement tools that will help recognize suspicious traffic and screen social media use to catch and stop phishing before it actually happens. And those are really important, but those aren't enough, right? Technical solutions are not enough. We must train our people.
I think this sentence sums it up quite nicely. That, quote, the success of spear phishing attacks depends on finding the weakest link. Goodbye, you are the weakest link in a corporate network. That weakest link can be just one person.
Just
Who
one.
falls for an authentic looking email.
That's right.
Since the target of these attacks is actually the user, it is, say it with me now, the user that needs to be the first line of defense.
That is deep.
And completely BS.
It's really deep.
Because technically the user is not the target. What is the target?
It's the data.
Correct.
The user is just a means to the end.
The user is just a meat puppet to get to the data.
Wow. I have never heard that saying before. I hope I never hear it again.
I was going to put it on our next tchotchke.
Okay.
Speaking of tchotchkes, by the way, the rumor has it there are some hints.
There's a hint out there, yes.
About our DerbyCon tchotchke.
Yep.
That's all I'm going to say. Just those who are attentive will know.
All right. So moving on in the story, there's another point in here. The more end users are aware of the risks, the more they'll be able to not act in an impulsive way when pressed for information, and will be able to evaluate each request. And they go on to say that training for executives is particularly important because they're the primary targets. Which, we can kind of say that's probably true. We had what was it, Ubiquity Networks, right? They had almost $50 million stolen in a fraud.
Completely coincidentally, I'm building a really nice beach house.
Awesome. And then they go on to say that 95% of all attacks on enterprise networks are the result of successful spear phishing. And
really?
And so number
95.
one, I question the validity of that number, but let's just assume for a minute that it is in fact true. What does that say about our ability to successfully deter spear phishing? I mean, does that mean that no one at all? I mean, I look, if I were writing this article, I wouldn't cite that fact.
Well, let's stop for a moment and ask, who is writing this article?
Well, in fact, I believe it is a number of people. Actually, I don't know who the specific author is, but a number of people who are interviewed do own and operate training companies.
And what do they train for?
Spear phishing.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
I know. It's crazy. But here's the thing, right? People latch onto this stuff, and I fear that it gives false hope, and so that's why I'm spending the time to make fun of it. Right? So let's move on, right? A well-trained team can be taught to recognize the sign of a phishing email, phony website, or other suspicious behaviors. And that completely ignores the fact that people break down under pressure when they're tired, when they get disillusioned with their job, when they have a really tight schedule, or they hate their boss, or the point is that email, if you've ever read Kahneman, is a System 1 activity, and we're trying to.
What do you mean by System 1 activity? for those who haven't heard that term.
So System 1 activities are automated things. They're like, recognizing your friends. They're, driving. If you've been driving for a long time, it's driving your car. System 2 is much more deliberate, takes a lot more energy. This System 2 is taking a math test. It's trying to figure out which thing you should invest your money in. And it's those sorts of things that as humans we often subconsciously work pretty hard to avoid spending effort on. And so email, I propose, is a System 1 activity that we spend the minimal amount of time and attention possible. And I say that kind of renders a lot of this is, kind of a theoretical bunk, I guess, for lack of a better word. In particular, when you read some of the, I go back to some of the things that we heard about in the wake of the Syrian Electronic Armies attacks. I think it was who was it? It was one of the wasn't The Onion. One of the websites, parody news sites, got hacked, and they did a kind of an expose or decomposition of how they got hacked. And one of the things that came out was an executive of theirs checked her phone early in the morning, right after she got out of bed, and fell for, clicked on a link because that's the thing you have to be cognizant of. Is it's really easy to have all these platitudes that say, look, let's train people how to detect phishing and shady looking emails. But think about this: are they gonna be able to do that when they have one eye open and they're looking at their phone in their bed, right? Because that's what you're doing.
This goes to the same sort of training muscle memory, whether it's brain memory or whatnot, that almost any technical skill comes down to. So if you're in a stressful, critical situation, you default back to what you've been trained to do, right? So, and you only have a certain amount of ability to be trained to a certain amount of level and maintain that proficiency throughout your life. And so I think what I hear you saying, or at least the way I interpret it, is that we IT security people think, breathe, and eat IT security. So it can be innate and native to us to spot phishing without extraordinary levels of, sort of brain power. Yep. But for the average user, it's not what they do and see every day. So it is a big deal for them to go, It's sort of like when you first start learning to drive a car, you're really thoughtful and really have to put a lot of mental energy into driving that car. Well, eventually it becomes innate and intuitive. And it's not that you're not thinking about it, but it's that your lower brain is thinking about it, and you could do things subconsciously. And it's why in a crisis or in a near crash situation, your body can react so much faster than your conscious mind can, because you've got this innate built-in unconscious ability to drive once you've gathered enough experience. And so I see that very similar to what you're saying about spotting phishing emails. We in the IT security industry probably can spot them pretty easily because it's what we do every day. The average user does not.
Exactly.
And to expect them to get that level of proficiency, I think, is unrealistic.
Yeah, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to provide them enough training to build it up either.
It's not their core competency. It's not what they care enough about. The incentives aren't there for them to care.
And we're going to get into something in just a minute here, which I think is even more problematic. So continuing on, they talk about to avoid spear phishing. They have some suggestions. Number one is never provide personal or financial information in response to an email request. And I got to say, in the context of a business, is that really rational? I mean, can you actually expect that you cannot, you're going to tell your employees to never respond back to the HR department, with some kind of personal information? I think I think we would have to, in order for that to be a rational position, many of us would have to re-engineer our business processes that have developed. It's just a reality. Their next item was do not act on suspicious emails, which sounds awesome, but what the heck is a suspicious email? And let me also ask, what's going to happen the first time someone ignores an important, urgent, legitimate email? Are they going to get rewarded for, being cautious, or are they going to get, bitched out?
Excuse me, executive admin, why didn't you transfer that $4 million to India like I asked you to an email last night?
Let's be really clear here.
I mean, that is the flip side. That is why that scam is working right now.
Absolutely. And I think it's, number one, there is no good definition of what a suspicious email is, right? And so, you can show people, you can parade out examples of suspicious emails all day long, but you know what? They get more and more and more and more like legitimate looking email. And I really think that if we're going to take this seriously, our culture has to be such that we're not gonna, we're gonna be okay if people ignore legitimate emails, because that's the inevitable consequence.
Where you get to, you're no longer doing, business action through email because it's no longer valid or trustworthy.
Yep. And
so, go ahead.
I was going to move on, but go ahead.
So all that being said, are we at a point where we want to talk about what actually works?
Oh, that's further down. We got a lot more. I got a lot more problems.
Rant on, my friend.
All right. Do not open attached files or click on links without first knowing the sender and their URL address.
What?
And can anyone really follow that guidance?
And why would that stop anything? It's real easy to spoof this from my random executive dude or dudette.
I just,
or some other gender neutral version of dude. Yeah.
Somebody a long time ago gave me this piece of advice, and it goes like this: when you're down in a hole, stop digging. Okay.
And yet you keep inviting me back.
Fair enough. But I got to thinking about almost everything we do. Lots of common business practices are trending in a direction that is making this more and more difficult. Like every link you get in an email now is obscured through some marketing company's ad tracking or things like that. So what's a suspicious link? And who do you know? How many people do you converse with over email where you actually know them? In the context of a business, is that really a rational thing to say? If you're an HR person or a recruiter, do you really expect to know all the people that you're going to be emailing with? I just,
especially when they have resumes.
Yes, exactly. They're going to be sending you their resumes.
I'm a sales guy, and I need to process POs. Oh, I can't process your PO.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Yes, that's not going to go over very well. So I just think those don't work very well for me. Report any recognized phishing attempts, and for what purpose?
So let's talk this out. So let's say, and I'm not picking on FishMe, but there's a company I know of called FishMe, and they do awareness campaigns by sending out basically fake phishing emails. Okay, and they track stats, and it's actually kind of interesting. You can see how many people opened it but didn't click on the link, how many people clicked on the link, and it's a unique link per person, so you can figure out what departments are more likely to be a little clicky, and it's all sorts of interesting stats. And they can craft these phishing emails to look like just about anything. So you can craft as difficult or as easy of a test as you want, and ultimately, if they do click on one of these FishMe links, it takes you to a webpage that says, oh, you fell for a phishing email. You need to be more careful and read this guide, or however you want to educate them. They're interesting campaigns to show the state of the problem, and it trains some users to some degree, some percentage, and it probably cuts down phishing to some round number, right? There's probably a return of maybe 20 percentile, or I don't know, I'm making up something, but it's never going to get to zero ever, and you're never going to be able to eliminate that risk at the human layer, because the bad guys can always keep changing their technique,
and they do,
and they're always going to find something that works. They only have to be right once.
Yeah, well, so this is a really complicated mathematical problem, because you think about all the employees you have in your organization, and how many opportunities do each one in a given day have to fall victim. So it's not just that each individual person is an opportunity. It's like at every moment during the day, every one of your employees is a potential
Not just
target.
employees, though.
Well, right.
Third parties,
yes,
vendors, other people who are connected to your environment,
right.
Contractors. I mean, it's a huge ecosystem.
Yes, and so it's I just I've said it before, and I think that awareness training is effective at reducing the rate at which people will, in aggregate, fall for phishing and email-based scams. However, it could say take it down from 20% failure rate to 10% failure rate. That other 10% is going to be astronomically difficult. And
you're also assuming that the adversary is static in their technique.
Exactly.
So if I've got an adversary who's truly focused on my environment, they will keep trying different techniques until one works.
And by the way, this whole article is not talking about the general case of phishing. This is specifically intending to talk about spear phishing.
Right.
Right. And so when I say, my view on awareness training as it relates to phishing is that you can, in fact, reduce your help desk load and your incident response load if you can cut that rate down, right? But it is not going to save your tail from someone who's a dedicated adversary who's going to spearfish you.
Now, the one thing I will say is that I do believe that is important if you do have users who recognize an attempted spearfish or phishing to report it to the IT security group, because that same email may be sitting in other people's inboxes that you could delete, or you could black hole that domain or something along those lines.
Yeah, and that was going to be my question. What do you do with it once it's been reported?
Oh, well, yeah, it's like local threat intelligence at that point. It's an IOC. It's it gives you a pointer to look for other malicious activity, and you might be able to do some forensics of who's actually clicked on this, and you can start tracing that back, so you know the kind of the scope of the problem you have. But in general, it's too late at that point. That's not where we've pretty much decided that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think there's a value diminishing returns on user awareness training. Do we have to do it? Yes. It's now codified in a whole bunch of various compliance, so it's not going anywhere. Does it have some impact? Yes. Is it sufficient? Hell no.
Yeah.
So we're stuck back with technical controls.
Right. So I got one more point, and then we're going to talk about some ideas.
I keep jumping ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So they have this point here. Busy executives and executive assistants might not have the time at their disposal to really analyze the email received.
Really?
Therefore, frequent training is needed to help stop the instinct to reply with sensitive data or click on suspicious links. And so I know we've both been around executives a lot, and I got to tell you, if they're that busy, you're not going to have an opportunity to do frequent training.
I have watched in personal experience, and I know frequent sexual harassment training has never stopped an executive from doing that, much less anti-phishing.
Touche. Wow, I knew you would find a way to take that somewhere weird.
But that's my job. But let's be honest, this goes back to the same thing we've talked about over and over again, and I'm not slamming all executives here, but if they have a certain set of incentives and a certain role to fulfill, little things like stopping to examine if this is phishing is not a good use of their time, and they know it's not a good use of their time.
Right.
And it's just not something they're going to think about, and they're not going to worry about it. That they've got too much other stuff to do. And
this is a problem for that damn IT department to fix.
Yeah.
Not for me. If I'm not supposed to click on that link, they should make it so I can't click on that link.
Mm-hmm.
That's so anyway, now let's talk about some ideas on how to actually address this.
No,
You're done. You fired your bullets and you're done.
No, it's a complicated problem. But in my mind, it is like any other malware problem. This is just the vector.
Yeah.
Okay? So you have to treat it as an endpoint problem with malware.
Well, to be fair, though, it is a little beyond just malware, because some of this, like the Ubiquity thing, is actual just con jobs.
Oh, that's true. And I'm ignoring that for a moment, but you're correct. That's straight up social engineering. That's not even in the realm of IT. That's just, somebody being conned.
Right. So I was thinking about this, and clearly there is a human element here, and I do not think that training is the end all here. But I've been thinking about how can you use technology and training and behavioral, what I'll call behavioral controls, to kind of interleave, right? So things like going back to the Ubiquity case, right? One of the things that just appears to me, and we've seen this happen a bunch of times lately, where people are getting scammed out of tens of millions of dollars, and it's like controllers of companies and CFOs, and this was the chief accounting officer, I think, of Ubiquity that did this. This is kind of a business process problem. I mean, if you have a business process where you are going to be transferring money, you should probably design it such that someone, a person can't unilaterally make that mistake, even if it is the CFO. There should be, in most financial processes, there's usually some kind of a two-step or two-person kind of process, especially when you're talking about millions of bucks.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you have a sole executive, and this is exactly what they're playing on, you've got to pre-establish those business controls.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I know it's going to be painful, but how painful is it to lose $50 million?
It's kind of like establishing a safe word before. Oh, never mind.
Oh, jeez. Then another one I was thinking about is highlighting emails that come from the outside.
Yeah, I've seen a number of companies put external on the subject line, which is not bad. And
it's not a perfect control. However, going back to the Syrian Electronic Army case, that person or that lady fell for an email that I going back, I'm not exactly sure if it appeared to come from outside or inside. But in any event,
I fear though that an external tag will end up being like the SSL invalid certificate flag. Just click continue to go past it.
Possibly so, but if you have, if your coworker is, Jane Doe, and you get an email from Jane Doe and it says external, that's the case that I'm.
Aren't we kind of falling back into the same problem? We're expecting the user to notice and care.
Yes, but we're giving them more clues.
Okay, fair enough.
It's not a it is not a technical thing. I'm just looking at how can we.
And to be clear, I like it. I'm just pointing out that's not perfect.
And then going back to the malware perspective, I've talked about this to death on the show, and that is just don't allow people to click on links or open attachments on systems that have access to sensitive data. Figure some way to build an isolation. And I know that's an unpopular thing, and people will email me and saying that's just unreasonable to do. most organizations. But, at some point, do we cross the threshold where it becomes reasonable?
Well, it's all about the pain to mitigate the risk, the cost.
Yeah, yeah. Or implementing, some kind of system level controls, whether it's virtualization or, something to implement that isolation for you.
Well, and go ahead. Sorry, I've got some others to throw in.
No, that's it. That's it for me. Go ahead.
I keep trying to interrupt you on the show. I'm sorry. There's a few others I've seen in my career. There's some tools like Proofpoint, for instance, that is specifically made to analyze inbound emails for phishing and malware emails, and they'll do some interesting things. Like, for instance, if there's a link in the email, they'll go and take a look at that link and see if that link is malicious. If it is, they rewrite that link in email before it gets delivered to the inbox. I think that's clever. There's tools like FireEye that will scan emails for inbound attachments that are malicious. It doesn't do as well with links. It has some limited support for that today. I think that's useful. I think if you look at the endpoint as being under attack, there's a number of other things you can do, from various endpoint controls, whitelisting to, we've got some new technologies popping up for micro VMs and, that sort of stuff to sort of protect the endpoint from hostile code. There's a lot of options, but I think fundamentally, I wouldn't agree with the 95% stat, but I would say it's high. It's probably the number one single vector for exploit activity right now, at least the initial footholds coming into organizations.
Yeah, it's clearly a big problem that we're not addressing well. I think is the net point. What I wanted to get out of this discussion is that we're not dealing with this well, and trying to train our way out of it is not going to have the effect I think that we're hoping.
So I think fundamentally what we're also saying is that the InfoSec Institute will not be calling us with job offers.
I'm guessing not.
We have not enjoyed their Kool-Aid.
All right.
So it's a complex problem, but it's a real problem. It's one I don't think gets enough attention, and it's a vector that's incredibly powerful right now.
That's right. So moving on to our next story, since we beat that one into the ground. This one comes from HelpNet Security, and the title is 79% of companies release apps with known vulnerabilities. And which by the way, on its own is kind of a weird stat, because if you read down, it actually says that 43% of companies admit to releasing applications with vulnerabilities at least 80% of the time. So
this is starting to sound like a complicated math word problem.
Yeah. So, Tim leaves Biloxi going 60 miles an hour. There we go.
If 0-day A is twice as big as 0-day B, and 0-day C is half the size of 0-day B. Sorry, carry on.
No, but I think the net point is, whatever the numbers are, and I think we all probably can relate to this to some extent, this is another situation of mixed up incentives, because we have a situation here where organizations are in fact releasing products that have vulnerabilities. They know it has a vulnerability, but because of some external or internal deadline, it needs to get out the door with I assume every intention to go and fix it later. And the problem there is that it probably also has unknown vulnerabilities. So it's this is just compounding an already bad problem. And I don't have a great point here, just to say, man, this industry has got its work cut out for it. We're going to be employed for a while.
Well, I think if you look at the incentives, software companies and internal development groups, whatever, are incentivized to ship code, not secure code.
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. We as consumers, that's not on the on the top of the list. I mean, Microsoft, I guess, gives lip service to Windows 10 being secure, right? But that's few people. I don't think really rate security, especially in an organizational context. Do you, before you go off and decide you're going to buy the next version of Exchange Server, do you ponder whether it's more secure or less secure than IBM's Notes? No, you just buy it and upgrade.
Its usability, its functionality, its features, its
right.
You especially the best is when people issue like RFIs and such, and they have security as a primary motivator. But you could have something that's completely unusable but very secure, and they won't buy it. Trust me, it's not what drives the industry. We could have an incredibly secure version of Windows, but it would probably take 10 years to develop. It would have very, very little innovation and cost a whole lot of money.
Right.
And that is not what drives our industry.
And I wonder, what would it look like if you were to actually make that a requirement? What would it look like? Would you say, it has to be secure, or would you say you can't?
What does secure mean?
Yeah, you can't have had a more than 3 CVSS 9s over the past 5 years, or and does that even make any sense for going forward, or is it it takes the vendor a certain amount of time to close or under a certain amount of time to close a vulnerability once it's disclosed? I mean, what would be the metric that you would even use to go and objectively measure on?
Well, I know the government has some. You can look at some of the certifications of government for a certain level of security.
Yeah, because NIAP and Common Criteria are
right.
Whatever.
But, they're trying, right?
I know. I'm sorry.
But okay, so let's play that out. If I were truly a software company and I was developing a product and I wanted to tout security, I could say, all right, well, look, I used a tool like Fortify on Demand as I was coding, and I've got the secure coding development lifecycle, and I've taught all my coders how to do secure coding, and I've ran every bit of code that I could through static code analysis, and I eliminated these 800,000 vulnerabilities before we went to compile. And then after, I ran it through, whatever the applicable vulnerability scanning tool is. If it's a web app, I threw, we'll keep picking on HP, Web Inspect at it, and White Hat, and a bunch of other stuff. And I remediated all those vulnerabilities. And then I put in production. And then I added an insecure password to an account, right? I mean, So what are you going to do? It's not just development. It's also how you implement it, how you administer it, how you run it.
Right.
And how you utilize it. In what setting is it in? In what environment is it in? Any functionality you turn on is, potentially a risk. And then you're not going to patch because the patch might introduce a new risk.
Yeah, especially if it's an enterprise application, yeah.
And yet, we're also told that we can't run end-of-life software. That's its own risk.
Right.
So I don't know that you're ever going to get to that point. I think the incentives and the finances and the way people make money in this industry is to constantly innovate. And that is not healthy for security. Now, are we getting better at security? Yes. But it's also kind of like fighting the last war. We're getting better at plugging the holes at a foundational level of common problems that we've seen for many, many years.
That's right. And we continue to find new, fundamentally new vectors or techniques.
And I don't have a better answer for you. I think it's just going to keep being this way. You could always bolt on some third-party applications like whitelisting or micro VMs or whatever. And in essence, what you're doing is you're taking away that innovation and functionality and locking it down to a specific situation so that, it has less flexibility but more security.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, because keep in mind, especially when you're looking at something like Mac OS X or Windows 10, it's being developed for a massive user base with incredibly diverse needs.
Right.
So, from grandma sitting at home watching Wheel of Fortune to massive enterprises. Yeah, they've got different revs, but at the end of the day, it's the same code base.
It's a fair point.
And that's just picking on the operating system. So, I think browsers are the perfect example of this problem. We want to drive more functionality and more capability into web browsers. So what do we build? We build Java, we build Flash, we build JavaScript, we build all these capabilities, HTML5. And all of them introduce vulnerabilities, including HTML5. But we want that functionality.
That's right.
We have to watch our cat videos.
It's very important.
And if we don't virtually farm, our virtual people will virtually die.
And your virtual crops will wither and die. It'd be terrible.
Anyway, I'm done.
It is it honestly feels like a dysfunctional treadmill we're on.
Well, I don't know. I think it's the realization that every application, everything in your environment can be exploited and broken. If you go in with that mindset, you're ahead of the curve. Assume your applications are vulnerable. And then how do you limit the damage?
Yep. I think that's what we have. That's what we've got to deal with. So, anyway, speaking of robust applications, our next story is a doozy. I found this one on the Security Metrics mailing list.
And just so you know, I left that robust application joke alone in reference to your mom. I did that for you.
Well, thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. How would you know otherwise?
I don't know. I don't know. So this comes from the Springer.com, and I think it's trying to appear to be somewhat of an academic kind of article, and the title is "The Case for Election Technology." And the net point is, it's a very long article that basically says we are crazy for continuing to use paper ballots, and we need to embrace electronic voting because it's far more secure. And it's a pretty long article to explain that, but there's really 2 paragraphs that I think say it all, and I'll read it right now. To create a completely unhackable system, Smartmatic, that's the name of the company that employs the person that wrote this, combine the following ideas: security fragmentation, security layering, encryption, device identity assurance, multi-key combinations, and opposing party auditing.
Bingo.
Explaining all of them is beyond the scope of this article. The important thing is that when all of these methods are combined, it becomes possible to calculate with mathematical precision the possibility of the system being hacked in the available time, because an election usually happens in a few hours or at most over a few days. For example...
Wait, and that code base was immediately discarded and never used again?
Well, we're going to get there.
Sorry, go on.
For example, for one of our average customers, the probability was 1 times 10 to the minus 19. I assume he means the probability of being hacked. That is a point followed by 19 zeros and then a 1. The probability is lower than that of a meteor hitting the Earth and wiping us out in the next few years, which is approximately 1 times 10 to the minus 7th. Hence, it is reasonable to assume the term unhackable, to the chagrin of the purists and to my pleasure. So, yeah. So this is really interesting, and it sits at the intersection of some things that interest me very greatly.
Does that include stupidity?
Well, actually, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I think I'll get into the statistics in just a minute, but I think that there's a common kind of logic that underlies many IT people and managers and people everywhere who, who kind of think they understand the world and how it works. And so in this particular case, this group, and by the way, I know nothing about what technologies they've implemented, and so I'm making an assumption, which I feel pretty confident in my assumption, right? That that all of these things stacked together mean that this thing is, in their words, unhackable. And the problem is that they don't often, and I'm sure this person doesn't think this way either, understand, the other ways that this system can be attacked, right? So they might, and a successful attacker may not attack it by trying to reverse the encryption key. There may be some completely other avenue. Again, I don't know much about this particular thing. I'm talking about this in the abstract. This is a great example where I think people just believe that systems, particularly systems they've designed themselves, are far more robust than they actually are. So now I want to talk about statistics for 1 second.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, interestingly, the way he phrased this, hacked in the period of time, reminded me a great deal of how safes are built and certified. And so a safe has a rating for amount of time it would take for a skilled intruder with, the common safe cracking tools to break into a safe.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where he's going, yeah.
Right. And the problem with that is that when you're dealing with a safe and tools, the principles of metal and metallurgy and the robustness of all of your hinges and all of the connections are known at an engineering level beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so you can estimate and test these things pretty consistently because the skill set is fairly static. The problem is, and I think you're alluding to this, is that when we start talking about IT security, it's akin to somebody coming up with a brand new type of acid that nobody has ever seen before, that eats right through the metal in a few moments, that no one ever accounted for or anticipated to defend against.
Exactly. That's exactly it, yes. Right. So when you look at inevitably the way this person calculated the probability of this system being hacked at 10 to the 1 times 10 to the minus 19, sorry. There's this principle that says in statistics, if you have independent events, you can multiply their probabilities together to find out what the aggregate probability is. So if I flip a coin, it's 50% likely to be heads or tails. If I flip 2 coins, right, I can multiply 50. Any particular combination, I can multiply the 2 likelihoods together, and I come up with, it's a 1 in 4 chance of any particular combination of 2 coin flips coming up. And so my assumption is that this person came to the conclusion that if you were to take the security fragmentation adds so much complexity, the encryption would take it is so complex, it has its own level of complexity, and on, and you multiply these things together, you get this really unlikely number, 1 times 10 to the minus 19. But that assumes that each individual thing is completely independent of all the others. And so
right.
in the case of a coin flip, the next coin flip is in no way dependent on the previous coin flip. And that means that I can, in fact, multiply the probabilities. However, if for whatever reason, through some weird law of physics, if a coin flip the outcome of a coin flip depended on the one before it, you couldn't do that. It wouldn't work. And in the same sense, what my experience certainly, and I assume many other people's experience, is that these IT systems are, they're very complex. They've been implemented by, a team, and you often see common failures that run through them, and or kind of side channel attacks, or just completely unexpected bypasses that render that the whole probability calculation nonsense. I mean, this calculation here makes me crazy. And what makes me most crazy is that it struck me that this is the logic that many people are subscribing to, even if only subconsciously, when they are designing their IT systems, or when they're listening to the vendor of some new next generation firewall talking about how much security their thing is going to add to their network. This is the fundamental problem, or one of the fundamental problems, that people are really not understanding, that these systems are far more complex than we understand them to be, and hence, while it seems very easy to calculate with mathematical precision, you really haven't actually calculated anything.
But it sounds good in marketing, man.
I know. It does.
Well, I think this is a fundamental point of where a good pen test could really show the fallacy. I don't think this guy means anything malicious. I think he truly believes what he's saying. But I think this is the case with many designers of many pieces of technology. They just don't think like bad guys do. They feel their assumptions and rules, and it's like being in the Matrix. But those who know how can bend those rules.
Yes.
And that is the problem. They go in with all these assumptions.
Right.
Well, that's just not possible. Well, guess what? It sure is. It's like people throwing fuzzed TCP/IP packets at things. Well, we never anticipated, because TCP/IP specs aren't written that way. So we never thought they would give us a half-open scan and then flood us with a ton of UDP, and then it hit us with a reply for a TCP packet we never sent out. We never thought that would happen, because that doesn't happen in the real world. Guess what?
Who would not set the evil bit?
Right. And I've seen this over and over and over again when developers or product managers come up with these ideas based on these criteria, or based on these sort of assumptions they don't even realize they're making in the lab, and then when it goes into the real world, they're just completely befuddled, because that's not how things work in the real world. There are no rules.
That's right.
I can make a packet look and feel like anything that TCP/IP can do. I can sit any bit any way I want. I don't have to follow any spec. Just as an example of a network-borne attack, and there's many, many others. But no, I think you stated it really well, and you brought up a really good point.
Yeah, and this, by the way, I think is what you just mentioned is a reason I think, we're running out of time, but we'll touch on it very briefly. I think there is value in the designers of IT systems like this in having an awareness at some level of depth, not very deep, of the tactics that the bad guys are using, right? Because I think that these people haven't taken the red pill, right? And they're not they've not seen the outside of the matrix. They're not aware that those kinds of things can happen.
So the question is, should they be? Is that too much to expect of product designers?
If they're not, then what do you have? I mean, it just seems like they need to. If you are designing a system, you ought to know to some level the ways that system can fail.
I concur, or is this a multidisciplined activity that other people help with? An architect isn't the only person designing a building. He's got engineers and others involved.
And that's fair. That's fair. But And so maybe this is the whole purple team thing, right? But I guess this is even more. Purple team is more like security operations, and using red team to help defend your network. This is way farther up the chain, right? This is in the product or the system design phase. And I think that some amount of awareness would go a long way there.
I agree. I worry that it's the same problem that we have with training users for phishing.
I think so. I mean, it's certainly not going to be a perfect thing, but I do think that I see it happen quite often that system designers are just completely oblivious to the attack techniques that are out there in the world.
Yeah, I agree.
I can't believe that someone would compromise my system like that. That's just not possible until it happens.
And I think if we're not careful how we communicate it, we sound like just cynical FUD mongers who are just spreading fear and damnation and hell and repent or you're going to die kind of stuff.
That's a great point.
We got to be careful about the credibility issues.
That's a great point. It's a very good point. Which, by the way, I think is one of the reasons that we'll dovetail nicely into the talk on the discussion about Black Hat, DEF CON, and B-Sides, which sadly neither of us were able to attend. And I think your observation even more than mine is that most of the talks are dare I say junk hacking, red team type stuff. But going back to what you just said, nothing makes takes the whole FUD aspect out, like showing someone how you can actually compromise a system in a particular way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's why pen tests work. As artificial as they are and as constrained as they often are, they work because it's a visceral demonstration.
Right.
And yeah, I think we were out of time, but we were going to talk a little bit about, Black Hat and DEF CON and red team is sexy, blue team is boring. That's how a lot of people perceive it. And that's why you see the talks you see get selected because that's what the community wants to see.
Yeah. Yep. What I took away, I mean, in the waning moments we have here, what I took away is do not hook your Tesla or your Jeep up to your corporate network.
Yep.
And you should not be processing sensitive financial transactions on your Jeep or your Tesla's, entertainment systems.
But the sales guy said I could.
Take that up with them.
All right.
So anyhow,
what if your corporate network is actually Tesla?
I'm still going to go and say you shouldn't do that.
All right. Fair enough.
Just me. Anyhow, I think that's all we have time for this evening. And thank you again for listening. Thanks to everyone who has donated to our Patreon campaign. That's very awesome. The gifts are on the way.
Are they?
Oh, they are. Yes.
Oh,
for those,
we'll have to see if some tweets show up.
Yep. And if you like the show, give us some love on iTunes. We're way down there on the bottom. We're right behind like a 5-year-old Drupal podcast or something. So it's really sad.
Our wives judge us based on our ranking in iTunes. Just so you know.
That's true. Yeah, I was going to say something inappropriate, but whatever. You can find the podcast and the links to the stories we talked about on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Always appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to our show.
Take care. There's a theory or philosophy related to
No, that's fine. Go ahead, check your phone. We'll wait.
Sorry, God bless
No,
America.
It's all right. It's your show. Do what you want. We'll listen to you snore while you take a nap if you want, for God's sake.
So, anyway, System
Just
1.
turn your mic off before you go to the bathroom this time.
System 1 and System 2 are a concept that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky came up with to explain the different behavioral processes people have, right? Oh, for Pete's sake. Other phone ringing now.
That's because you're name dropping like a bitch, and people are calling up going, "Yo, what up? I heard Kanye talking about you."
So yeah. Anyhow,
Happy editing.
happy editing, yes.
Did you use the words "get me my Switch" at any moment today?
Okay. I guess it wasn't a good idea.
No, it was a terrible idea. One of your worst ever, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I can think of another one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.